picture this. A local sheriff is called out to a quiet suburban home for what seems like a completely standard welfare check.
Right, something they do every single day.
Exactly. But when law enforcement arrives, they walk into an absolute nightmare. They find a victim hanging from the rafters in the living room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And just a few feet away, resting perfectly centered on this nice mahogany desk, is a suicide note.
So it looks like a tragedy, right? Like a textbook open and shut situation.
Totally. To the first responders, the scene looks perfect. The handwriting on the note appears to match the victims. The physical circumstances of the room make sense. And the lead detective is basically ready to close the file.
Hand the property back to the family, rule it as suicide.
Right. But then a digital forensics investigator steps behind the police tape, and they don't even look at the physical note.
What goes straight for the hardware?
Exactly. They ignore the paper entirely and pull the victim's computer hard drive. They extract years of emails, text messages, Microsoft Word drafts, all these digital letters.
Because that's where the real baseline is.
Yes. By running this meticulous algorithmic analysis of the tone, the syntax, the specific phrasing, and, the invisible digital footprint left behind in the metadata, this investigator makes a chilling discovery.
The victim didn't write the note.
The victim did not write that note. The syntax patterns are a statistical mismatch. Someone else typed the draft, printed it out, and completely staged the room.
Which instantly flips the entire case.
In a split second.
Yeah.
The manner of death changes from a closed-case suicide to an active, high-stakes homicide investigation. So, welcome to the invisible world of forensic linguistics and digital forensics, where a single keystroke can literally catch a killer.
It's just the perfect illustration of how the physical crime scene is essentially just a rough draft of the truth these days.
Oh, I like that. A rough draft.
Yeah, because we leave a highly complex, multidimensional shadow of ourselves in the digital world. When the physical evidence lies, or when someone, goes out of their way to manipulate it, the raw data usually tells the unfiltered truth.
And unlocking that truth is exactly what we are plunging into today. But before we break down the actual mechanics of how that investigator proved the note was a fake, I want to take a quick second to speak directly to you, the listener.
Please do.
So picture yourself 3, maybe 5 years from now. You are an IT director, a financial analyst, or maybe you're the CEO.
Sitting in the big chair.
Right. And you catch wind of an embezzlement scheme or intellectual property theft, or maybe you're dealing with a massive data breach.
Which is pretty much inevitable these days.
Seriously, whether you are an MIS, CIS, or IT student, or you're building your foundation at Tarleton State University's Dr. Sam Pack College of Business, positioning yourself for a bright future means you have to understand the technology that drives your field.
You absolutely cannot manage a crisis if you don't understand the digital battlefield.
Exactly. So to make sure you never miss out on the insider technical tips that will keep you ahead of the curve, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this deep dive.
It really makes a huge difference.
It does. Also, check the description right now, because we have linked some incredibly valuable resources, including case studies and toolkits, that you are absolutely going to want to access to supplement your learning.
It fundamentally comes down to owning your career growth,
Yeah, taking charge of it.
Exactly. The digital landscape shifts so aggressively that the tools we use today might be completely obsolete in 5 years. You have to embrace a lifelong learning mindset.
You really do.
If you aren't constantly engaged with the underlying mechanics of these systems, you just become a liability to your organization rather than an asset.
So true. All right, let's set the stage for today's session. Last week, we took a really intense look at Chapter 12, dealing with mobile device forensics.
Right, cracking into cell phones, bypassing lock screens.
Yeah, and understanding how mobile operating systems store data in those sandboxed environments. But today, we are taking a massive leap forward into Chapter 13, which covers email and social media investigations.
A huge topic.
Massive. We are pulling the core architectural knowledge today from the 2025 textbook, Guide to Computer Forensics and Investigations. This is by Nelson, Steuart, Phillips, and Wilson. Out of the 15 chapters in this incredible series, this is Chapter 13.
And honestly, it is arguably the most applicable to the daily life of a modern business professional.
I totally agree. So we need to establish a very clear mission for this discussion.
Yeah, we are taking a strategic TED Talk style approach here. Because while catching a murderer using email syntax is a fantastic hook.
It's a great story.
It is. But the reality is that 99% of digital forensics isn't about homicides. It is about corporate survival.
Right. Keeping the business alive.
Exactly. The modern business operates entirely on the flow of digital information, and the primary veins and arteries of that information are email and channel-based messaging.
So when something goes wrong, like a proprietary source code leak or vendor fraud or even a hostile workplace harassment claim, you need to know precisely how the underlying systems work.
You have to know how to isolate the threat, preserve the evidence legally, and fix the vulnerability.
So let's start with the anatomy of an email crime. How do these things actually operate within a corporate network? We hear a ton of buzzwords thrown around by the media, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Phishing, pharming, spoofing.
Right. Let's look at the underlying mechanics of these because for a network administrator or an investigator, they represent completely different tactical approaches by malicious actors. Let's start with phishing, spelled with a PH.
The classic.
Yeah. I feel like most business students know what this is by now, a fake email trying to get your password. But how does it actually function on a technical level?
Well, phishing is fundamentally a social engineering attack delivered via a technical medium. It relies on manipulating human psychology rather than, say, breaking through a firewall.
Got it. So it's about tricking the person, not the computer.
Exactly. An attacker sends a highly targeted lure. They often masquerade as a trusted entity like a bank, an internal HR department, or a software vendor.
Right, an email that looks superficial.
Yeah, and it attempts to harvest personal data by baiting the recipient with a false sense of urgency. Usually it contains a hyperlink.
And that link is the trap.
Yep. Now, that link doesn't just ask for a password. It usually directs the victim to a site meticulously designed to mirror the legitimate site.
Oh, so it looks exactly like the real corporate login page.
Identical. And the goal is to capture session tokens, harvest credentials, or even execute a silent drive-by download of malware onto the user's machine.
Okay, so it's the classic, your corporate VPN access has been compromised. Click here to authenticate email.
That's the one.
But what about pharming? With the PH as well, pharming seems much more insidious because you don't even necessarily have to click a bad link in an email, right?
Exactly. Pharming is terrifying because it attacks the infrastructure itself. Specifically, it compromises the DNS, the domain name system.
Think of DNS as the internet's phone book, right?
Perfect analogy. When you type tarleton.edu into your browser, the DNS translates that human-readable name into the specific IP address where the server actually lives.
Right, because computers talk in numbers, not letters.
Exactly. With pharming, the attacker poisons that DNS cache.
Whoa.
Poisons the cache.
Yeah. So a user can type in a perfectly legitimate website address from memory, hit enter, but the underlying corrupted routing redirects them to a fake look-alike server controlled by the attacker.
Wait, so the user thinks they are logging into their real portal, and the URL in the bar might even look completely normal.
It looks totally normal, but they are handing their authentication keys directly to a hostile actor.
That is absolutely terrifying from a corporate security standpoint.
Yeah.
Because the employee did everything right.
Exactly. They didn't click a sketchy link. The infrastructure betrayed them.
Wow. Okay, then there's the classic 419 scam. I was reading a case study from the textbook about a guy named Ike who received an email claiming his distant relative died.
Ah, yes, the classic inherited fortune.
Right, and it said it left him a massive inheritance, but he just needed to wire a small handling fee to a foreign bank to release the funds. Yes, the advance fee fraud. It is widely referred to as a 419 scam, named after the specific section of the Nigerian criminal code dealing with fraud.
Although today these syndicates operate globally, not just in Nigeria.
Oh, absolutely everywhere. And the psychological premise is always the exact same. A massive life-changing payoff is promised in exchange for a comparatively tiny upfront investment or administrative fee.
So it basically just preys on desperation and greed.
Exactly.
Okay, and finally, spoofing. This is where it gets highly technical, right? And where investigators have to really dig in.
Spoofing is a major headache.
Because spoofing is when a hacker alters the actual header information of the email so that the point of origin appears to be from a legitimate, trusted sender.
Right, you get an email that absolutely looks like it came from your CEO's actual internal email address.
And the CEO is supposedly asking you to wire funds to a new vendor immediately.
To understand why spoofing is even possible and how forensic investigators ultimately dismantle it, we really have to talk about the underlying architecture of email.
Let's do it.
Every email environment, whether it's the open internet or a closed corporate intranet, relies on client-server architecture.
Break that down for me. When I open Microsoft Outlook on my laptop, what is physically happening between my machine and the company's hardware?
So your laptop running Microsoft Outlook or Apple Mail is the client. It is constantly reaching out across the network to the central server, essentially asking, hey, do you have any new data packets addressed to my user ID?
Okay, so it's pulling for updates.
Right. And the server acts as this massive digital post office. It receives incoming mail from the outside world, sorts it, and when your client asks, it pushes those specific packets down to your local inbox.
Makes sense. But there is a massive operational difference for an investigator depending on whether that server is part of an intranet or the internet, right?
Completely different worlds.
Because an intranet email system is an internal private network strictly for a company's users, whereas the internet system is for public use, like a Gmail or Yahoo account. I would imagine an intranet is a much friendlier environment for a digital forensics investigator to operate in.
It is infinitely friendlier. When you are investigating on a corporate intranet, the IT department is the ultimate authority.
They hold all the keys.
Exactly. They enforce rigid, predictable naming conventions. A user cannot just invent some random anonymous handle.
Right. It's usually like first initial and last name.
Exactly. But more importantly, they control access through a centralized user management system. Most commonly, Microsoft's Active Directory.
An Active Directory isn't just a basic list of names, right? It actually binds the user's identity to the hardware.
Precisely. Active Directory assigns unique security identifiers, or SIDs, to every single user.
Oh, so it's deeply integrated.
Very deeply. It binds your email identity to your physical workstation's MSC address, your specific security clearance level, and the company's acceptable use policies.
So if an investigator needs to track down the source of an internal threat, the suspect pool is strictly limited to the company's logged employees.
Exactly. Every single login, file access, and email sent generates a Kerberos ticket and is logged against their specific Active Directory profile. The forensic trail is totally enclosed and highly regulated.
Okay, let me throw a wrench into this.
Go for it.
Picture yourself as an investigator looking into a Fortune 500 company for massive corporate espionage. But this company doesn't host their own servers in the basement anymore. They've migrated everything to a massive public cloud service provider.
Very common nowadays.
Right, and those servers aren't sitting in an IT closet in Texas. The data is sharded and stored in a mega data center in Frankfurt, Germany. So you have a suspect, you have a warrant from a Texas judge, you just call up the cloud provider and ask for the data, right?
Absolutely not. And this raises a crucial point that business students really must understand about international cloud architecture.
Because the physical location matters.
Immensely. When servers cross international borders, you hit a massive jurisdictional wall. You are no longer operating solely under U.S. law.
Even if it's an American company investigating an American employee.
Even then, if you are trying to extract server logs from a data center in Germany, you must navigate incredibly complex, strict privacy frameworks like the GDPR.
The General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union?
Exactly. Data sovereignty laws dictate that the physical location of the server determines the governing law of the data residing on it.
Wait, so why does Germany care where the hard drive sits if the crime happened here?
Because to them, it's their digital soil. You cannot simply take a warrant signed by a state or federal judge in the U.S. and apply it globally to seize hardware in Europe.
So what do investigators actually do?
They have to work through mutual legal assistance treaties, or MLATs.
MLATs, okay. How do those work?
They require the U.S. Department of Justice to formally request the cooperation of the German government.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredibly slow.
It is. It turns a standard corporate extraction into a months-long international diplomatic process.
That is a total logistical nightmare. But hold on, let me push back on this entire premise for a second.
Sure.
We are spending a lot of time talking about complex server rules, Active Directory, international email laws. But isn't email kind of archaic?
You'd be surprised how often I hear that.
I mean, I use Slack for my startup. I use Microsoft Teams. I text my colleagues. If I'm a future business leader listening to this session, why should I care so deeply about email forensics? Isn't email just the digital dinosaur tracks of the internet?
I get the argument, but it is a massive misconception. I really want you to reframe how you view email. It is not just a chat application. Email is the corporate nervous system.
The nervous system?
Yes. Your day-to-day project chatter might have moved to Slack, Teams, or Discord. But think about the structural foundation of your digital identity. Where do the official, legally binding vendor contracts go?
Eval.
Right. Where do the password reset links for your Slack account go?
Ah.
Email. Where does HR send the official termination notice, the benefits package, or the compliance policy updates?
Email. Okay, that makes total sense. It is the foundational identity layer.
Exactly.
So if I compromise your Slack channel, I can read your project notes. But if I compromise your email, I own your entire digital existence.
You have the keys to the kingdom. You can trigger password resets for their bank, their servers, their CRM, literally everything.
Wow, okay.
Because it is the skeleton key, it remains the absolute #1 attack vector for cybercriminals and corporate spies. And the legal system recognizes this, which is why laws are actively evolving to protect that specific nervous system.
Oh, that makes sense. Like that case study involving Washington State.
Yes, the anti-spam law.
Right. They enacted a very specific, aggressive anti-spam law. So suppose a resident there, let's call him Tegan, is getting bombarded with deceptive emails from a shady debt consolidation company.
And that company also happens to be incorporated in Washington.
Exactly. And the subject line of the email reads, "Check unclaimed," which is highly misleading.
It's very misleading. So under Washington's law, because both the sender's origin server and the receiver are within the same state jurisdiction, and the subject line intentionally misrepresents the origin or subject matter, the state can literally sue the company sending the spam.
Wait, really? It's not just treated as a nuisance?
Not at all. It is a legally actionable corporate violation with severe financial penalties.
So the stakes are incredibly high. Tracing the email, catching the scammer, understanding the jurisdiction, that is all vital.
Absolutely.
But let's pivot back to that opening true crime hook for a minute. Because tracing an email to a specific laptop is only half the battle.
Right. Getting the machine is just step one.
Exactly. What happens when you, the investigator, sees the laptop, you have the email sitting right there on the screen, but the suspect looks you dead in the eye and says, "I didn't send that. I left my laptop unlocked while I was getting coffee. Someone else in the office must have sat at my keyboard and typed it."
The classic alibi.
Right. How do you mathematically prove who actually pushed the keys?
This brings us to a deeply fascinating domain called forensic linguistics. It is literally the scientific intersection of language and the law.
Oh, okay. Language and the law.
Yes. The International Association of Forensic Linguists divides this discipline into 4 distinct categories.
What are they?
Language and law, language in the legal process, language as evidence, and research and teaching. Digital forensics is laser-focused on that third category, language as evidence.
This connects directly to the investigator looking at the suicide note.
Exactly.
They didn't just read the words for their meaning, they stripped the language down to its mechanical parts.
Right. They took known, verified emails, messages they knew for a fact the victim had written previously.
And compared them to the forged document. They were looking for a psychological fingerprint. So what exactly are they measuring?
They are performing what is known as stylometry. Every single human being has a unique cadence to their writing, an unconscious rhythm to their vocabulary.
Oh, like how some people always use the word hence or something?
Exactly. Forensic linguists analyze syntax structures. Does this person consistently use Oxford commas? Do they spell out numbers below 10, or do they use numerals?
That is so subtle.
Very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Do they favor passive voice over active voice? What is their lexical richness, meaning the ratio of unique words to total words?
Oh, wow. They actually calculate that.
Yes. They look at n-grams, which are predictable clusters of words that a person habitually strings together. By analyzing these deeply ingrained habits, experts can determine authorship with a degree of statistical probability that holds up under cross-examination in federal court.
But wait, and this is a massive existential but for anyone entering the workforce right now.
I think I know where you're going.
What about the AI complication? We are living in the era of large language models. ChatGPT, Microsoft Bing, Google Bard, Claude. Generative AI fundamentally simulates human intelligence.
It is a massive game changer.
Because I can open ChatGPT right now and prompt it. Write a convincing corporate email to the finance department demanding an urgent wire transfer to a new vendor, and write it in the specific, terse, demanding style of our CEO using his exact vocabulary.
And it will do it almost perfectly. This is the critical inflection point in modern investigations. Generative AI is aggressively disrupting the entire field of forensic linguistics.
How did it work before AI?
Well, in the past, if a low-level threat actor in a foreign country tried to impersonate a Fortune 500 CEO, their linguistic fingerprint would betray them immediately.
Like bad grammar or weird phrasing.
Exactly. Poor grammar, awkward idiomatic phrasing, or just a failure to capture the CEO's specific authoritative tone. Those were massive red flags.
But now
AI can scrub those human tells completely. The algorithm generates perfect syntax. The tone is flawlessly mimicked. It completely sanitizes the stylometric fingerprint?
So if that is true, then how do we catch them? If a corporate spy uses an LLM to write a flawless spear phishing email, are linguistic fingerprints completely obsolete? Has the defense finally outpaced the investigators?
It forces a total paradigm shift. While the words themselves might be completely sanitized of human imperfection by the AI, the delivery mechanism cannot be hidden.
The delivery mechanism, explain that.
An AI can write a mathematically perfect sentence, but it cannot magically teleport that sentence onto a secure corporate server without leaving a digital wake.
Right, it still has to be sent.
Exactly. This reality naturally forces the forensic investigation to shift away from the textual content itself and dive straight into the technical metadata that carried the payload.
So if we can no longer trust the words, we have to trust the headers.
Beautifully said, yes.
Okay, that is a brilliant transition. If the words are just an AI-generated mask, the metadata is the DNA left on the mask. So let's talk about the digital paper trail headers, logs, and tracing. But before we rip open a server, there is a strict protocol for handling this evidence, right?
Absolutely. The golden rule of digital forensics, which every IT or business student must engrave into their operational memory. Never, ever work from the original evidence.
So if you suspect a specific email contains evidence of a crime, harassment, or a policy violation, what's your first step?
Always preservation. If you are using an application like Microsoft Outlook, you carefully export or copy that specific message file, often a .msg or .pst format, to a sterile external storage medium.
Like a forensically wiped USB drive.
Yes. From that exact moment on, the original is locked down, and you only run your analysis on the copy.
Why is that so rigid? What happens if I just open the original email to take a quick look?
If you alter the original evidence in any way, even just clicking on it and inadvertently changing the unread status to read, you have altered the metadata.
Oh, because the file has a new timestamp.
Oh. Exactly.
Yeah.
And a good defense attorney will argue that if you changed the read status, you could have changed the body text. You introduce reasonable doubt, and you can instantly destroy the file's admissibility in a court of law.
So the mantra is, analyze the copy, preserve the original.
Always.
So we have our pristine copy isolated on a USB drive. Now we need to dissect the email header. And honestly, if you've never looked at the raw source code of an email header, it looks like absolute gibberish.
It really does. It is a massive wall of text, routing codes, cryptographic signatures, timestamps.
But to an investigator, that gibberish is a detailed map.
It is the itinerary of the data's journey. When you open an email header in a basic text editor like Windows Notepad or Vim on a Linux system, you are looking for specific forensic landmarks.
What kind of landmarks?
You want the originating domain address. You are looking for the exact date and time the message was injected into the routing protocol.
And checking if the domain was authenticated.
Right, you're hunting for domain keys identified mail signatures, DKIM signatures. You want the specific file names and MIME types of any attached files. And crucially, you are hunting for unique message identification numbers.
Let's zero in on one of those identifiers, because this is where the forensic science gets mathematically undeniable. The ESMTP number. ESMTP.
A massively important piece of evidence.
For the students listening, let me break down the history of that acronym. It stands for Enhanced or Extended Simple Mail Transfer Protocol.
Right.
Back in the early days of the internet, the original SMTP was designed just to send basic, flat ASCII text. It had no idea how to handle graphics, attachments, or rich media. So ESMTP was engineered to allow all those complex file types to be transmitted.
And the forensic superpower of ESMTP is the tracking mechanism. Every single time an email server processes and transmits a message, it generates and assigns a totally unique, randomized ESMTP alphanumeric string to it.
To understand the power of that string, let me ask you to give us a highly practical scenario, maybe from a corporate fraud case.
Okay, picture this. We have an investigator arbitrating a legal dispute between two parties. The petitioner claims they received an email authorizing them to purchase a massive block of company options.
Okay.
They swear the email is legitimate and present it as evidence. The respondent looks at it and claims it is a complete fabrication. They never authorized the purchase.
So it's a classic he said, she said scenario. The text of the email says buy, but the sender completely denies writing it.
Exactly. It's a deadlock. Until the forensic investigator pulls the raw headers.
And what do they find?
They extract the header from the petitioner's supposedly legitimate authorization email, and they isolate the ESMTP value. Then they request a known, verified email sent by the respondent around the exact same time.
To compare them.
Right. They compare the two strings, and the ESMTP values are an identical match.
But wait, didn't you just say the server generates a unique string for every single transmission?
Precisely. The mathematical entropy makes a random collision virtually impossible. The only physical way two emails can have the exact same ESMTP string is if the petitioner took a genuine, unrelated email sent by the respondent, maliciously altered the body text to fake the stock authorization, but failed to realize the original routing header was still attached to the file.
Wow.
Yeah, the matching ESMTP proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the petitioner's evidence was a spoofed forgery.
It's the equivalent of finding the exact same serial number on two supposedly different $100 bills. One is counterfeit.
Exactly.
But let's expand the map. The header tells us the origin and the ESMTP string. But what if the attacker used a spoofed IP address? What if we need to see exactly which servers the email bounced through to get to us?
Then we have to trace the movement of the data across the network.
How do investigators do that?
Think of the internet not as a nebulous cloud, but as a massive, highly structured system of highways. And every time data packets move from one local network to a broader network, they have to pass through a router or a firewall.
A lot of people use the analogy of a toll booth camera taking a picture of a car's license plate.
It's a good start, but it's actually much more complex than that. Think of it more like a high-speed postal sorting machine.
Okay, sorting machine.
An email doesn't travel as one solid car. It is chopped up into thousands of individual postcards, which we call packets. The network router reads the destination zip code on every single postcard, stamps it with a precise microsecond timestamp, logs that transaction in its internal memory, and shoves the packet down the correct fiber optic wire.
So if an employee claims they sent a crucial compliance email from inside the corporate office on a Tuesday at 2 p.m., but the internal firewall, that sorting machine, has absolutely zero log of those specific packets passing through its ports at that date and time.
The investigator instantly knows the email is a fabrication. It didn't originate from inside the house.
The logs don't lie.
They really don't. Now, when investigators trace these packets back and find an originating IP address, but they don't know who physically owns the server attached to that IP, they rely on internet registries.
Like ARIN.net, the American Registry for Internet Numbers.
Yes, or Interrect.com. These registries act as the master ledgers of the internet. They tell you exactly which corporation or ISP registered the domain, when it was registered, and the physical geographic location of the servers.
It basically systematically strips away the attacker's anonymity.
Piece by piece, yes.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly powerful in theory, but let's bring this back to the practical reality for the MIS and IT students listening.
Let's get to the real world.
We know the firewall catches the email packets. We know the routing data is vital. But how do investigators actually rip those logs directly out of the server room? Because a UNIX machine and a Microsoft Exchange server are going to fight you in completely different ways, right?
Oh, this is where we descend into the engine room of network administration. The operating system dictates the entire forensic extraction strategy.
Let's look at UNIX and Linux environments first.
Sure. If a company is running Linux, they are likely utilizing mail server daemons like Postfix or SendMail.
And those are pretty robust, right?
Incredibly robust, highly stable, and heavily reliant on flat text configuration files. A file named syslog.const acts as the director, telling the server exactly which directory to save different types of email log events into.
So where does the investigator look?
Typically, an investigator will find the absolute goldmine of routing evidence in its specific directory path. /var/log/maillog.
Right.
This continuous text file records all the granular details of the SMTP, POP3, and IMA4 communications.
Let's pause right there. You mentioned POP3 and IMA4. For the business students who might just see those as settings on their iPhone mail app, what is the forensic difference between the two? Because how the protocol handles the email fundamentally changes where the evidence lives.
It makes a massive difference. So POP3, or Post Office Protocol version 3, is an older system designed to download the email from the central server directly to the local client device.
Okay.
And then crucially delete the original copy from the server.
Oh, wow. So it's just gone from the server.
Gone. If a suspect uses POP3, the investigator must seize the suspect's physical laptop, because the server no longer has the evidence.
And IMA4.
IMAP4, the Internet Message Access Protocol, is a synchronization protocol. It leaves the master copy on the server and just mirrors it to the client's device.
So if a suspect uses IMA4,
the investigator can extract the entire mailbox directly from the corporate server without ever touching the suspect's physical phone or laptop.
That distinction alone could make or break an investigation. Also, a quick technical note regarding paths for the IT students writing extraction scripts. We just mentioned the path /var/log/maylog. UNIX uses forward slashes, whereas Windows uses backslashes.
Right.
From a forensic standpoint, why is getting that syntax right so critical when running an automated tool?
Because forensics tools operate at the foundational level of the operating system. If you are running an automated extraction script on a mounted Linux drive from a Windows forensic workstation, and your script mistakenly passes a backslash into a UNIX path, it's bad.
It doesn't just give an error.
No, the script won't just politely return a file not found error. In some older or more aggressive carving tools, poorly formatted directory calls can cause the software to hang, crash, or worse.
Worse.
It could inadvertently corrupt the active memory state of the drive being analyzed. Precision is paramount. You are performing digital surgery.
Wow, okay. Now, UNIX servers are fascinating from an investigative standpoint because their architecture allows for some incredibly creative, stealthy surveillance techniques.
Oh, definitely.
Picture a scenario. An investigator is hired by a company to monitor an executive suspected of funneling proprietary trade secrets to a competitor. The company uses a UNIX server where all emails are routed. The investigator needs to read the suspect's incoming emails without alerting them.
Because if they force a password reset and log in, the suspect is instantly locked out of their own account.
Exactly. They would realize they are under investigation and start systematically destroying external evidence.
Right. The moment the target feels the heat, the data starts burning.
So what can the UNIX admin do?
The UNIX administrator employs a silent mirroring tactic. On a UNIX system, user permissions are often managed by groups. The administrator can simply create a hidden, heavily restricted investigative group on the server.
Okay.
They then silently add the forensic investigator's credentials to the exact same access group as the suspect. By tweaking the mail routing rules slightly, every single email that arrives for the suspect is instantly invisibly mirrored and copied to the investigator's hidden inbox.
And the suspect has no idea.
None. The suspect continues to receive their mail normally. They have absolutely zero idea their communications flow has been compromised.
It's essentially a digital wiretap.
Precisely.
Now, what about the other side of the corporate aisle? A massive chunk of the Fortune 500 infrastructure runs on Microsoft Exchange servers. How does extracting evidence from Exchange differ from parsing those flat UNIX text files?
Exchange is a completely different, highly complex beast. It relies heavily on MAPI, the Messaging Application Programming Interface.
MAPI. Got it.
Which allows different Microsoft applications to communicate seamlessly. Instead of writing logs to simple continuous text files like UNIX does, older Exchange servers utilize massive, complex .edb database files.
Why is an EDB database harder for an investigator to read than a flat text file?
Think of a flat text file like a continuous ticker tape. You could just read it from start to finish. An EDB database file is more like a massive interconnected three-dimensional web of data blocks.
Oh, that sounds messy.
It is. Emails, attachments, calendar events, and contacts are all fragmented and linked relationally across the database. You can't just open it in Notepad. To track messages, Exchange maintains a highly structured file, literally called tracking.log.
And to extract this safely.
Investigators don't use simple text editors. They rely on PowerShell.
So they are running command line scripts directly against the server architecture?
Yes. An investigator would authenticate and run a specific PowerShell DM DLIT. Something like get transaction logstats.ts1-gather to extract and compile the raw data.
And if the admin enabled verbose logging?
Oh, if they enabled verbose logging, the investigator hits the jackpot. They get microsecond timestamps, sending and receiving IP addresses, the routing path, and potentially fragments of the actual body contents. They will also dive deep into the Windows Event Viewer to correlate the email timestamps with system-level alerts, like unauthorized login attempts or firewall blocks.
But this reliance on server logs brings up a massive pitfall, and this is perhaps the most vital compliance lesson for any future business leader listening to this session.
I know exactly what you're going to say. Log rotation.
Yes, let's talk about the nightmare of log rotation. Administrators log data for essential operational reasons, recovering from a power failure, checking if the firewall is blocking a spam attack, or enforcing basic network policy.
Right, it's just standard IT maintenance.
But hard drive storage space isn't infinite, and logs generate gigabytes of data rapidly. So servers are configured to utilize log rotation.
And forensic examiners absolutely despise log rotation.
Yeah.
It is the bane of historical investigations.
Break down why it's so bad for forensics.
Log rotation is a routine, automated process where, after a certain file size threshold is reached, or a specific number of days pass, the server automatically deletes or overwrites the oldest log files with new data, just to conserve disk space.
So if a complex financial fraud is executed in January, but the missing funds aren't discovered by the auditors until late March.
Exactly. If the corporate server is configured to rotate its logs every 30 days, and the digital forensics team is brought in 60 days after the crime occurred, the routing evidence is permanently gone.
Just overwritten.
Completely. The vectors on the hard drive have been overwritten with February and March's traffic. Unless the IT department had a strict data retention policy that involved actively backing up those log files to external tape drives or separate cold storage servers, that data is vaporized.
You cannot investigate a crime if your own infrastructure has systematically destroyed the evidence.
Exactly. This is why data governance and retention policies are not just IT busywork. They are critical legal protections for the corporation.
Okay, so let's look at the worst-case scenario.
It happens.
The server logs rotated out, the data is overwritten, and the server is useless. Or maybe the suspect is using a highly customized proprietary email client. Or worse, what if the IT administrator is actually complicit in the embezzlement scheme and refuses to cooperate?
Then it gets really difficult.
When you cannot rely on the server politely handing you a neat little log file, you have to break out the heavy machinery. What specialized tools do investigators deploy when they have to extract the data from the hardware by force?
When you hit a wall, you turn to specialized forensic carving tools.
Carving tools?
Yeah, these are highly sophisticated software suites designed to read the raw binary data directly off the physical platters of the hard drive.
Wow, completely bypassing the operating system.
Completely bypassing the OS and the need for an administrator's passwords. The industry has an extensive arsenal. You have DataNumen, which is phenomenal because it specializes in recovering corrupted files and can carve data from within virtualized environments.
Like VMware instances, virtual PC drives, and ISO disk images.
Exactly. You also have dedicated tools like Finale Mail, Aid4Mail, Xtero FTK Forensic Toolkit, and Magnet AXIOM.
What I find mind-blowing about these tools is that the investigator doesn't even need to know how the suspect's specific email client operates.
Nope. You don't need to boot up their version of Outlook. The forensic software just scans the raw hexadecimal code of the hard drive, hunting for the specific file signatures and headers of email databases.
Yes, it is signature analysis at the byte level. And that capability is crucial because of how complex email file formatting can be.
Very true. Vendor-unique file systems, like Microsoft's .pst or .ost files, typically utilize MIE formatting.
Multi-purpose Internet Mail Extensions, MIME.
Correct. MIE formatting is what allows an email to contain non-text elements like PDF attachments, embedded images, and rich HTML text.
But because it encodes all that data into alphanumeric blocks, it makes the raw file incredibly difficult to read if you just open it with a standard hexadecimal editor, right?
It looks like a scrambled matrix of code. Conversely, some older or open-source systems use the MBOX format, which simply concatenates all emails into one massive, continuous plaintext file. MBOX files are an absolute dream for investigators because they are incredibly easy to carve and read.
Let me walk through a specific technical scenario to illustrate how this extraction works in practice, because it really highlights the problem-solving nature of the job.
Let's hear it.
Let's say you have seized a suspect's Linux machine, and they use an open-source email client called Evolution. All their communications are stored locally in a hidden directory named .evolution. But your company's forensics lab is entirely built on Windows machines. How do you safely read a proprietary Linux email directory on a Windows forensic workstation?
It requires a precise sequence of cross-platform data translation.
So what's step one?
The investigator would boot up the seized Linux machine in a forensically sound manner, using a write blocker to prevent any data alteration or mount the forensic image of the drive. They would then execute the native Linux tar command.
TAR stands for TEEP archive, right?
Yes. They use it to compress and package the entire .evolution directory into a single file known as a tarball.
Okay, we've got the tarball.
Then, they securely transfer that single tarball file over to their Windows analysis machine. Once safely on the Windows system, they uncompress it.
And because the extraction process converts the proprietary database back into raw, flat text files,
A standard Windows hex editor or forensic suite can now open those files. The investigator can read the emails directly, bypassing the limitations of the Linux operating system entirely.
it is essentially like taking a book written in a highly localized dialect that only one specific library can read, vacuum sealing it, shipping it across the world to a different lab, and then untacking it so anyone with a universal translation matrix can read the letters.
That's a perfect analogy.
But speaking of massive amounts of data, we absolutely cannot talk about email forensics without addressing the massive ghost that haunts the entire digital discovery industry. We have to talk about the Enron scandal.
Enron. It is the foundational apocalyptic case study for modern digital discovery. It changed everything.
Give us the context.
When the Enron Corporation collapsed in the early 2000s, under the staggering weight of systemic accounting fraud, federal investigators and forensic accountants swooped in. And what they uncovered on the servers was an unprecedented digital nightmare.
Because they were suddenly faced with the task of sifting through tens of thousands of corporate emails to find evidence of the fraud.
Right. But the reason it was such a nightmare wasn't just the sheer volume of emails. It was what the employees were casually sending in those emails.
Exactly. You have to understand the corporate culture and the technological naivete of the era. Email was relatively new as a ubiquitous daily business tool.
There were virtually no data collection, data governance, or compliant policies in place.
None. Employees treated their unencrypted corporate email accounts like secure, private filing cabinets. They were casually emailing massive Microsoft Excel spreadsheets internally that were absolutely loaded with highly sensitive PII, personally identifiable information.
We're talking completely unencrypted credit card numbers, lists of thousands of employees' social security numbers, sensitive medical claims information, and highly confidential legal strategies, just flying back and forth in plain text attachments across the vulnerable company network.
It was a compliance disaster of epic proportions. When the federal investigators seized the Exchange servers, all of that data was suddenly exposed to the discovery process.
But how do you find the smoking gun of accounting fraud hidden within 10,000 emails full of random social security numbers and lunch plans?
Right. It's a needle in a haystack.
This is where forensic science had to evolve rapidly. Investigators couldn't just read every email. They had to pioneer the use of e-discovery deduplication and keyword hashing.
Break that down. How does keyword hashing help filter the noise?
Instead of reading the emails, forensic tools were programmed to calculate the MD5 hash values, which is a unique cryptographic fingerprint for every single file and attachment. If an employee sent the exact same spreadsheet to 50 different people, the system would recognize the identical hash values and flag them as duplicates, instantly reducing the workload.
That saves so much time.
Massive amounts. Then they applied complex algorithmic keyword searches, filtering the database for terms like off-balance sheet, raptor, or specific executives' names, combined with date parameters.
And it allowed them to parse a mountain of data and extract the specific evidence of the fraud.
This monumental case forced modern corporate America to undergo a massive, painful paradigm shift. It is the exact reason why today, if you attempt to email a spreadsheet containing 500 social security numbers to a vendor, your company's data loss prevention software will instantly flag it, block the transmission, and alert the compliance officer.
Enron proved that you cannot let data flow unmanaged.
It was the ultimate cautionary tale of the early 2000s. It laid the groundwork for modern compliance.
But here we are decades later, and the reality is that business isn't strictly done on email anymore. Email is the foundational identity layer, but the day-to-day muscle movements, the collaborative projects, the informal chats, that is happening somewhere else entirely.
Which brings us to the most complex challenge facing investigators today: social media and channel-based messaging.
This is the modern Wild West of digital forensics.
The explosion of social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, alongside the absolute dominance of channel-based messaging applications like Slack, Discord, and Microsoft Teams. It has completely revolutionized how humanity communicates.
And consequently, it has completely revolutionized where criminals, corporate spies, and malicious actors leave their evidence.
Exactly. Social media isn't just a platform for sharing vacation photos anymore. It is actively utilized to conduct unregulated business, to coordinate complex cyberbullying campaigns, to brag about criminal activities, and to steal intellectual property.
And the technical hurdle here is that almost 100% of this activity is happening on mobile architectures. I think the recent statistic for Facebook was that out of nearly 3 billion active users, Virtually all of them access the platform via a mobile application.
This means investigators aren't usually pulling hard drives out of desktop towers anymore. They are seizing locked iPhones and encrypted Android devices.
And to get to the localized social media data, they often have to perform a highly invasive procedure known as jailbreaking.
Right. Jailbreaking, or rooting in the Android ecosystem, is the deliberate technical process of circumventing the device's operating system security and overriding the manufacturer's strict limitations.
Because companies like Apple and Google build incredibly secure, sandboxed walls around their application data to protect user privacy.
To get low-level physical file system access, to actually see the raw binary data of the apps, investigators have to exploit vulnerabilities to break through those walls. Once they gain root access, what they're predominantly hunting for are SQLite databases.
For the uninitiated, why SQLite? Why not just standard text files?
Because mobile devices need lightweight, highly efficient ways to store dynamic data. Most social media applications store their local data, things like cached chat logs, downloaded images, and contact lists in SQLite database files hidden deep within the application's root folder.
Okay, that makes sense.
Furthermore, SQLite utilizes wall files, or write-ahead logs. Even if a suspect deletes a message in the app, the deleted data often remains perfectly preserved in the write-ahead log until the database is fully compacted. Investigators carve those wall files to recover messages the suspect thought were permanently destroyed.
But seizing the physical phone is only one avenue. What if the suspect throws their phone into a river? The data still lives on the cloud servers, right?
It does. But here's where we slam into that international jurisdictional wall again. And it is 10 times harder than the corporate cloud scenario.
Yes, the jurisdictional borders are incredibly rigid. Social media platforms cross national boundaries instantly. A user might be physically located in Texas, the company is headquartered in California, but their specific account data is sharded across servers located in Ireland, Singapore, and Brazil.
And these massive tech vendors fiercely prohibit direct server access by anyone, including federal law enforcement.
You cannot just call up Meta and ask for an account's data matrix.
You must serve a strict, highly specific legal warrant or subpoena. The only recognized exception to this rule is an imminent danger emergency, such as an active shooter situation, a kidnapping, or a credible bomb threat, where law enforcement can file emergency exigent requests to legally bypass the standard warrant process to save lives.
Let's look at a very practical, highly common corporate case study involving social media that a business student might face in their career. Corporate IP theft, intellectual property theft.
To an example.
Imagine the scenario. An employee gives their 2 weeks' notice. They tell HR they are going to find themselves, travel, or take some time off. But a suspicious IT director or corporate investigator decides to check the employee's public LinkedIn profile.
Now, this happens all the time.
And right there, publicly broadcasted, the employee has updated their current employment to a direct rival company, and the start date listed is explicitly before their official end date at the old company.
That is immediate strike one. It establishes a timeline of dual employment and potential conflict of interest.
Then the investigator clicks over to their public Facebook page. The employee has posted pictures of themselves at the new rival office celebrating with a bottle of champagne. And the caption reads, complaining about their old boss, "I'm so glad I brought my client matrix files with me. I created them anyway. They belong to me."
And that caption is a legally binding confession.
It's crazy.
What is truly fascinating from a forensic and legal standpoint is the employee's deeply flawed justification. I created them anyway. In corporate law, under the work-made-for-hire doctrine, any intellectual property, code, or work product created on company time, utilizing company resources or hardware, is the exclusive property of the corporation.
It does not belong to the employee, regardless of who pressed the keys.
By publicly posting that timeline on LinkedIn and explicitly making that admission of data exfiltration on Facebook, they have handed the investigator an open and shut, heavily documented case of intellectual property theft. The metadata from the social media posts perfectly substantiated the corporation's legal claims.
It never ceases to amaze me how often people will just openly confess to corporate espionage on a public timeline.
They feel safe on social media.
But let's talk about the platforms where users operate under the illusion of total privacy. Discord, for example. Discord originated as a voice and text chat application for gamers to coordinate while playing video games.
But it has evolved into a massive ecosystem of private invite-only communities. And it was the absolute center of a major real-world national security crisis recently.
You are referring to the case involving the young Air National Guardsman. This individual utilized Discord, again, a platform fundamentally built for gaming communities, to systematically photograph, transcribe, and distribute highly classified, top-secret U.S. military and intelligence documents.
He was essentially showing off to a small, private server of internet friends. But the absolute rule of the digital age is that a private server is never truly private.
The classified data inevitably leaked out of the walled garden into public forums. Federal investigators utilized advanced digital forensics, tracing the IP addresses, parsing the complex server chat logs, and correlating the user data provided by Discord under warrant to track the leak straight back to his specific workstation and identity.
Which brings up a really crucial pushback question regarding channel-based messaging. Let's apply this to the corporate world.
Okay, hold on. If I'm running a startup and my entire company uses Slack for everything, every proprietary idea, every file transfer, every joke between developers, isn't Slack just a private walled garden? It functions exactly like an intranet.
Right, it's not public like Twitter or a public Discord server. Can investigators really get into that walled garden if they need to?
Yeah, that's the question.
They absolutely can, and they do it regularly. It is a walled garden, but forensic software suites possess the master keys to the gate. Corporate investigators utilize incredibly powerful platforms like Magnet, AXIOM, or specialized API modules like FTK Social Analyzer that are specifically engineered to rip through the complex JSON data structures of platforms like Slack and Microsoft Teams.
Wow.
They don't just read the active chats. They can algorithmically rebuild the entire channel history, complete with file attachments, thread replies, and crucially deleted messages that the user thought were gone.
But there's a massive legal catch to analyzing Slack, right? And it functions almost exactly like the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure in the physical world. The sheer volume of data in a company's Slack channel is overwhelming.
Yes. You might have thousands of completely unrelated personal conversations mixed in with the specific evidence you are looking for.
This introduces what we call the expanding scope problem.
Exactly. The parameters of a digital warrant are incredibly strict. Let's say investigators obtain a warrant from a judge to search a specific executive's Slack channels strictly for evidence of financial embezzlement occurring between January and March.
Okay, they have the warrant.
They use their tools to extract the Slack database. But while they are parsing the chat logs for financial terms, they stumble across a completely different channel where the executives are explicitly discussing corporate espionage and sabotage against a rival firm in November.
Oh, wow. So what do the investigators do? They have the proof of a massive crime right in front of them. Can they just take that new espionage evidence to the prosecutor?
Absolutely not, because the original warrant they are operating under was strictly limited to financial fraud between January and March.
So it's legally inadmissible.
If they simply seize the espionage evidence and try to use it, a competent defense attorney will immediately file a motion to suppress, and the judge will throw it out as an unconstitutional, out-of-scope search.
So what's the correct process?
The investigators literally have to halt their analysis, document exactly what they saw in plain view, go back to a judge, present the new probable cause, and request a brand new expanded warrant to legally cover the new scope of criminality.
It makes investigating channel-based messaging incredibly tedious and fragmented. But legally, adhering strictly to the scope of the warrant is the only way to ensure the digital evidence holds up in federal court.
It is a meticulous, exhaustive, and highly structured process.
And honestly, looking back at the sheer depth of everything we've covered today, it has been a massive journey into the architecture of modern communication.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started by exploring the psychological fingerprints of forensic stylometry and how generative AI is forcing the industry to look past the sanitized words and focus entirely on the delivery mechanisms. We mathematically traced the invisible paths of ESMTP headers as they pass through high-speed firewall sorting machines.
Down into the engine room.
Exactly. We descended into the server rooms, navigating the complex differences between extracting flat UNIX text logs and parsing relational Microsoft Exchange EDB databases using PowerShell. We talked about carving deleted data with hex editors, the massive deduplication breakthroughs born from the Enron collapse, and finally we navigated the modern, mobile-driven Wild West of SQLite databases, Slack warrants, and Discord leaks.
It is a vast, incredibly complex landscape, and it evolves every single day. But the core foundational principle of forensics remains absolute. Data is persistent.
Exactly. Which brings us full circle, right back to our opening hook. Picture that sheriff standing in the living room looking at the suicide note, completely ready to close the case.
The note on the desk might have looked flawless.
The physical handwriting might have been a masterclass in forgery. But in the digital age, humans cannot exist without leaving a trail. Whether it is the specific syntactic rhythm of a typed sentence, the microsecond timestamp of a file being accessed, or the routing data of an IP address logged in a server data center halfway across the world, the truth is always written in the data. You just have to possess the knowledge of where to look.
And crucially, the strict discipline to preserve it immaculately once you find it.
That is the ultimate key. Listen, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We really appreciate you investing your time and attention with us to master these concepts.
We really do.
And I'm going to repeat that crucial engagement, ask one more time. If you are an MIS, CIS, IT, or business student actively looking to truly own your career growth, to fundamentally understand the digital systems you will be managing, and to embrace a mindset of lifelong learning, please like, subscribe, and share this session. Make sure you explore the channel for our other deep dives, specialized playlists, video breakdowns, and technical classes.
There is an absolute wealth of practical knowledge available here if you just take the time to engage with it.
Absolutely. And do not forget to check the description below right now for those valuable resources we mentioned earlier. Get ready for next week, because we are moving into the penultimate module of this textbook series, Chapter 14, where we tackle the massive, heavily regulated world of e-discovery and corporate litigation.
That's going to be a big one.
It is. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you build your career. As generative AI continues to rapidly and aggressively blur the lines of human authorship, making it nearly mathematically impossible to tell human syntax from machine generation, how will you actively ensure the integrity and authenticity of your own digital footprint in your professional future? Think about it. That's a wrap on this episode of Digital Forensics. Until next time, analyze the copy, preserve the original.